Welcome to Women's Declaration International Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International. It's the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by 37,582 people from 160 countries and is supported by 518 organisations. In fact, probably a bit more than that, but we haven't updated the website recently. So I'm really pleased today to be introducing our speakers. We have Lara Lecuona from Mexico, and her talk is Magical Realism, Mexican Politicians and Gender Identity. And we also have Jenny Morris, who's an Alberta mother, and she's not going to show her face, but she's going to talk to us. We have Lara, who is also from Alberta, and Ava, who is a writer for Redux Online magazine, and she's going to be talking about sex-based rights in Canada, begin in Alberta. Then we have Linda Blade, who is Coach Blade, and I'll introduce her in more detail. She'll be telling us also about what's happening in Alberta. And then we're going to have Denise Garcia from Brazil. And she's going to, the title of her talk is The Panorama of the Erasure of Women in Brazil and the Creation of Matria, Perspectives for Confrontation. Our first speaker today is Lara Lecuona. She's WDI's country contact for Mexico and author of the recently published book, Gender Identity, Lies and Dangers, which I'm currently reading at the moment and is fantastic. So you'd think that not much new could be written because there has been a lot, but this is really new and very, very insightful book. Taking a very, very helpful perspective. So I keep on underlining bits of it and thinking, I'm going to use that, And it's in Spanish and in English. It's just come out in English. Anyway, welcome, Lara. Your talk today is Magical Realism, Mexican Politicians and Gender Identity. So over to you.
The regulars to this webinar know full well that gender identity ideology is stretching its tentacles all over the world. But there are people who believe some countries are still spared, including Mexico. I will present some colorful examples that show how gender identity is pervading in this country, particularly in politics. Magical realism, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, is a chiefly Latin American narrative strategy that is characterized by the matter-of-fact inclusion of fantastic or mythical elements into seemingly realistic fiction. Magical realism, according to one Matthew Strenker, is what happens when a highly detailed, realistic setting is invaded by something too strange to believe. It being a chiefly Latin American genre, it comes in handy for describing some situations which are growing more and more common in Mexico that beggar belief. Let me introduce to you some of the main Mexican advocates of gender identity. First of all, the first transgender deputy in the Mexican House of Representatives, Maria Clemente Garcia. He is a troublemaker. In 2021, he went inside the Congress cafeteria, and a few minutes later, he yelled something at the staff, threw cups and dishes on the floor, and strode out. He is also fond of abusing peaceful demonstrators on the streets, as when in May 2023, he told a woman who was demonstrating in favor of the new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, "I am a representative, but I represent poor people, not smug wealthy people like you who scowl, fucking boshag." Or when, in November 2022, he ran after several demonstrators to insult them, telling them, for example, "All of you who are demonstrating in favor of the National Electoral Institute," who was the theme of the demonstration, "are a bunch of lazy Indian plebeians." He can yell racist or sexist slurs and nothing happens. Nevertheless, he wants to declare March 28 as the National Day Against Hate Speech. Some other bills he has proposed are and this is interesting to see what the trans agenda is, what they are pushing, considering the murders of trans women as cases of femicide. By the way, 2 days ago, the Supreme Court determined that indeed a man can be a victim of femicide. Of course, for this to work, they have to call those men trans women. Another bill is about decriminalizing HIV transmission. Another one is, of course, about regulating sex work. In fact, Maria Clemente claims to be a sex worker and boasts about it. In October 2022, he posted in his Twitter X account a video of him performing oral sex to a man. Some congresswomen were very uncomfortable and criticized him for it, considering it was not an appropriate behavior for a deputy. My body, my choice, he said, of course. Most interesting of all, on July 6, 2022, he interrupted a conference on tackling human trafficking and migrant smuggling. He became enraged when Spanish feminist Rosa Cobo claimed that the sex trade should be abolished and called this hate speech. Dr. Cobo had said, prostitution is not right from an ethical and political point of view. It is not acceptable for a woman to become an object, and it is not acceptable for a man to objectify and commit violence against women who have very few resources and who are vulnerable. The climax came when Sonia Sanchez, a reference point for Latin American abolitionist feminism, told him that no woman is born a whore. And this man shouted back, I am a woman, and I was born a whore, and I like it. Big deal.
Para promover un discurso de odio en el canal del Congreso. Esto es un discurso de odio. Criminalizar a las compañeras en la televisión es un discurso de odio.
Permita continuar con el desarrollo del evento. Quiero mencionar de manera muy respetuosa que las opiniones vertidas en este Congreso, que serán vertidas inclusive a lo largo de los días del desarrollo de este Congreso, son responsabilidad exclusiva de quienes expresan y vierten esos comentarios.
No pueden usar los recursos públicos, los medios públicos para promover la discriminación. Están utilizando el medio público para contravenir la Constitución política de los Estados Unidos mexicanos.
Ninguna mujer nace para puta.
¡Eso! Yo soy mujer y nací puta y me gusta, ¿cómo ves? Tengo mi trabajo, con eso mi familia trabaja.
2 months later, in October 2022, Maria Clemente Garcia sought to offend a rival representative with whom he had participated in a TV debate, tweeting, isn't it true that Teresa Castel has undergone so many plastic surgeries that she's the one who looks trans? I look more natural than her, don't you think? Note how, in 2 lines, he managed to mock both middle-aged women for whom beauty mandates are particularly merciless, and trans-identified males who don't have so much passing as he believes he has. Teresa Castel, on the right, sued Maria Clemente Garcia for gender-based violence. One of the reasons was the tweet just quoted about the physical features of Teresa Castel, and another one is what happened the day when this photo was taken. Castel was in the Congress walking by, and Maria Clemente Garcia blocked her way in a threatening attitude and yelled at her. The Electoral Tribunal determined that even though Garcia had committed symbolic violence, she had been justified because Castel had called her a biological man. And they rationalized. This tribunal has to take into consideration the context of transphobia and violence experienced by the defendant as a trans woman, which leads us to conclude the violent conduct is non-existent. Maria Clemente Garcia Moreno, as a trans woman, is extremely vulnerable, and she struggles day by day for the recognition of her identity and her rights, which becomes a constant burden in her life. When there is an aggression, there is a reaction, and this can be expressed through dignified rage. Rage is not violence. It is an accumulated emotional reaction that expresses inconformity in the face of an injustice or persistent pain due to an unjust cause. So all these scenes we have just seen are not violence, are only expressions of accumulated pain or persistent pain. Well, Maria Clemente Garcia might be one of the most picaresque characters in transgender politics, but by no means the only one. This is Salma Luébano. He's not in a nightclub, but in the Congress, the day of the opening. So this is his first day in the new job. Luébano is the other first deputy of the Federal Congress who is trans. They don't say one of the first two trans deputies. They don't say one of the first two trans deputies. Both of them claim to be the first. Note how the same newspaper, El País, in different notes, describes both of them as the very first. In April 2022, along with several congresswomen, these two seized the podium, demanding Deputy Gabriel Cuadri, who is not in the photo, demanding him to be expelled from the Congress. Let me tell you what happened. When the deputies were debating the general health law, Cuadri had presented a motion, and these are his words, to prevent children and adolescents from being subjected to hormonal procedures, poverty suppression, or genital mutilation procedures without the consent of their parents and without a court order. And he added, these types of interventions should be taken exclusively by adults fully aware of the consequences on health, as well as on family, reproductive, and sexual life. Then Salma Luébano, here in a white dress, called Cuadri a murderous scoundrel and threatened him in a violent way, saying, as a proud trans woman, I want to tell the gentleman that he is very wrong and that he should also remember that he has children and family and that hopefully that will shut his mouth. In response, Cuadri then said, I want to draw attention to the fact that Mr. Luébano is threatening me in the plenary and that he does not provide any argument to the issue we are dealing with. He only insults and disqualifies. He wasn't lying, but indignation took over the chamber, as one reporter said. Deputy Cynthia López Castro said that Cuadri was violating Article 1st of the Constitution and non-discrimination on non-discrimination, and that calling this man in the white dress Mr. was disrespectful because Luébano decided to be a woman, and she demanded a public apology because Cuadri, is disrespecting all women, all deputies, and all Mexicans who have fought for many years in this country against discrimination. For this politician, as for any trans ally worthy of the name, imitating a woman is a human right, but saying Mr. to a man is disrespectful to all women. That's when Salma Luébano and his fellow first trans deputy, Maria Clemente Garcia, seized the podium. Then Garcia pushed, as we can see here, 70-year-old Santiago Krill, who was then president of the Chamber of Deputies, and snatched the microphone out of his hands. There's a video on that. There's no time to play it here, but you can search for it. Later that day, Garcia apologized with his whole heart, saying he had misbehaved and been disrespectful. Krill answered, anyone can make a mistake, let's turn the page. In case you are wondering if Maria Clemente ever apologized to Sonia Sanchez and the speakers and audience at the Congress on Human Trafficking, no, he didn't. In response to Quadri's alleged transphobia, Salma Luevano shaved his head and said, "Hate speech almost always ends in hate crimes. Gabriel Quadri is responsible of anything that might happen to me or my sisters from now on." By his sisters, he means other men like him, so-called trans women. "Hair grows back, but people's lives never come back." That's what he said. Long story short, Luevano sued Gabriel Quadri for calling him Mr. and for some supposedly transphobic tweets, and Quadri was convicted of gender-based political violence. Remember, Quadri was trying to protect children from unnecessary treatments and surgeries? The diversionary tactic proved to be very effective. Everything was overshadowed by the unforgivable misgendering, and the newspapers did not talk at all about the dangers of suppressing puberty, but about Quadri calling Luevano Mr. Surprise, surprise, Salma Luevano likes dressing up, not only as a woman, He can disguise as a pope in a country where 78% of the population is Catholic, and he can make fun of his political adversaries, as Gabriel Quadri, who he is disguised at here in the second photo. And everything is fine. In March 2023, Salma Luevano sued Teresa Castel, the same deputy Maria Clemente Garcia had committed a non-existent act of violence against, for a couple of tweets referring to Maria Clemente and Salma Luevano himself, which read, the tweets read, "These trans deputies are biological men and they don't represent the LGBT community. And the behavior of these trans deputies shows hate speech and violence against women." 2 months later, the Electoral Tribunal ruled that Castel's views constituted gender-based political violence against women. As a punishment, Castel must take a course in political violence, and she must extend a public apology and publish an excerpt of the sentence on her X account. In addition, she will be cataloged in the National Registry of Persons Sanctioned for Gender-Based Political Violence, which, by the way, was created to protect female politicians from political violence, not male politicians for being allegedly misgendered. Last January, in a political event in Yucatan, Salma Luevano greeted Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president of Mexico, with a kiss in the cheek. But the president was visibly taken aback. The people noticed it and criticized him. So he had to give an explanation. The very next day, very candidly and blissfully ignorant of who's in charge now and what are the new rules we have to abide by, the president said, "I kissed a man dressed as a woman, but I kiss men and they kiss me and men have sentiments. What's sexual preference got to do with it?" But then, of course, the president was criticized for misgendering Luevano. There was even a demonstration to demand a public apology. And apologize he did. The next day he said, "I want to apologize to a mate who identifies as a woman because yesterday I said she was a man dressed as a woman. I am very respectful and I believe in freedom and people should accept themselves however they identify as." If you are wondering if López Obrador has ever apologized to the women of this country for the 3,000 women killed each year with total impunity, no, he hasn't. And Salma Luevano didn't call him a transphobe. The bills Salma Luevano has presented in Congress include one for declaring November 13 each year National Day Against Hate Crimes, another one for declaring June 18 each year National Day to counter hate speech, and another one for declaring March 28 each year National Day to fight hate speech. And he's promoting a bill called Ociel Baena to imprison anyone who murders someone because of their sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, sexual characteristics, race, religion, disability, or nationality. Of course, this is already punished. The law says anyone who kills anyone has to go to prison. But who is Ociel Baena? As the newspaper El Financiero in the fashion section put it, in a note titled, "The skirts with which magistrate Jesus Ociel Baena fought for LGBT community," he considered himself non-binary and in 2021 started to use skirts and high-heeled shoes in the electoral tribunal in Aguascalientes as a message of inclusion and freedom. He made history by being the first non-binary magistrate in Latin America. Also, the first non-binary passport was issued for him. How did he know he was non-binary? There's an interview in which he confesses that he considered so-called gender quotas for women unfair and discriminatory. Increasing women's representation in legislatures wasn't his cup of tea. So what did he do? He declared himself non-binary in order to be able to compete for seats meant for women. He was very popular in social media, and he spent a lot of time making these little videos to promote gender ideology and show off his skirts and his fans. He obtained a lot of benefit from his self-proclaimed identity and his extravagance. In November 2023, Jesus Ociel Baena was found dead along with his male partner in their home. This was a tragedy, of course. But it was determined that no third party entered their home that night. So logically, one of them had killed the other one and then killed himself. Nevertheless, trans activists utterly reject that version and claim it was a hate crime, period. It is very suitable to their narrative and to all those bills about hate speech and hate crimes. To their minds, there is no possibility other than a hate crime caused by so-called hate speech. There is evidence that points to Baena himself as a killer, but the Public Prosecution Service dared not elaborate on it. The official version only hints in a very tangled way that the killer was his partner. Meanwhile, trans activists, including Maria Clemente Garcia, why not, capitalized politically on the killing. Says Maria Clemente, Ociel Baena's death was consequence of a hate crime. Saying no third party was implied in the killing, he's homophobic, ambiphobic, and transphobic. And deputies Teresa Castel and America Rangel, Senator Lily Telles, and failed presidential candidate Eduardo Verástegui, with their hate speech, incited the killing, so they should be investigated. Finally, I want to mention one of the main trans activists in this country. He doesn't identify as transgender, but he's the best ally any autogynephile could dream of. He was a member of the Mexico Supreme Court of Justice until November 15, 2023. He was Chief Justice from January 2019 to January 2023. He fiercely advocates the transgendering of children and is very friendly and accommodating to those men he calls trans women. In fact, it seems this is something personal to him, you know. And on January 27, he declared, "Trans women are women, This can no longer be discussed or debated because trans women also have the right to live an honorable life in peace without fear. Trans women are women, and they are the most discriminated against, and they suffer more hate crimes than anyone else, and it is more difficult for them to transit in their transition in this world. I hope these few examples have shown how thoroughly captured some Mexican institutions are, and how magical realism is not limited to Gabriel Garcia Marquez's and Isabel Allende's books. Mexican politicians do not lag behind. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Jenny Morris. She is an Alberta mother, member of Alberta Women's Declaration International. She's not going to show her face, but she is going to talk. So welcome, Jenny, and over to you.
My name's Jenny Morris. I'm Canadian. I lived in Atlantic Canada most of my life, moving to Alberta in 2015 with my husband and children. My background is working with male violence against women and criminal justice, but I'm here today speaking only as a mother and from the perspective of our family. And I'm going to be talking to you about my beautiful, intelligent, but vulnerable daughter, who is now 23. She identifies as a man, and last year had both of her breasts surgically removed by a surgeon in Red Deer, Alberta. So just to give you a quick perspective of how far we came, my daughter and I are now partially estranged because of recent events, and she's estranged from our family. But previous to this, I'll just read you something she wrote to me on my birthday a few years ago. And it's a picture of her and I in Mexico. And it says, "Everywhere beautiful you have taken me has been memorable because you were there with me. As a mom, you've been more than amazing. You have been kind, thoughtful, loving, funny, and strict when you needed to be. It has made me the person I am today and has shaped me for the person I'm becoming. Today, on your birthday, I can wish for nothing more than for it to be perfect. I love you more than words can say and numbers can count. Happy birthday." And I feel still, but definitely felt the same way about her. Just would do anything for my daughter. So this has been a devastating private journey for our family, but there's been some recent events that have led me to believe that I have to start speaking out so other parents don't become blindsided like our family have been. Despite how much we all know about the issues that are going on with transgenderism being promoted in the schools and kept from the parents, many parents do not have this on their radar. I recommend to everyone who has especially daughters, but children in school, to read Abigail Schreier's book. I wish I had read it, been able to have it years ago. So in early February of this year, our premier came out and discussed on TV some legislative changes that are going to make the environment for parents in schools and children in school much safer around the trans issue. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But because of that, some protests happened, and we were shocked to turn on the 6 o'clock news and see our daughter at NDP government. So the NDP is our opposition party in the province of Alberta. They endorsed a trans right protest, and one of the people they platformed was our daughter. So we saw the news, and her daughter had just been here for a visit in December over Christmas, had stayed with us with her girlfriend. And we turned on the news to see her at this NDP endorsed event, saying that when she came out as trans in high school, that her parents had disowned her, and that this was a reason why parents must be kept in the dark when kids come out in school, and that teachers and other adults should be able to keep their request for a name change, hormones, pronoun changes at school, that this should be kept from parents. So this was absolutely not the truth. And to our knowledge, she had not come out as trans in high school. She had come out as a lesbian, and that was fine with us. That was her choice, and we supported her as best we could. Of course, when she made this announcement initially, she was 15 and hadn't even dated anyone yet. So we were just watching and waiting and seeing what was happening with her. But to give you some background, we lived in Atlantic Canada, where the issues with gender ideology weren't really on the map. We were very naive. And then we moved to Alberta in December 2015. Previously, just the summer before we moved, our daughter, who up to this point, a girly girl. I am not a girly girl. I wear flats. I rarely wear makeup, but she was a girly girl. And we are a blended family. She comes from a background of trauma. My husband got custody of her, fought for it when she was 4 years old. But she had turned into a normal, happy kid after a lot of therapy, but was still vulnerable. But she got a scholarship to a camp called We Camp. So anyone from Canada will know what We Camp is. It was a very prestigious and popular summer program for kids in Canada, but it's now disgraced and no longer run. So we had done a lot of research on the camp, and it seemed great. They didn't discuss anything about gender ideology. This camp got hundreds of thousands of dollars from our federal government. But after camp, we noticed some changes. We noticed her saying some different terminology we weren't familiar with. So this was in the summer of 2015. So it was kind of a perfect storm. The government was talking about, at this time, our federal government putting gender identity and gender expression into our human rights codes. Then we moved to Alberta in December 2015. And when she started school there in January 2016, at the time the NDP government was in power, and they made sweeping changes to our schools. Children could now pick their own pronouns and gender at school, and parents were not to be informed. Boys could now play on the girls' team. They could change in girls' bathrooms and use the bathrooms, pick the change room that they prefer. And all schools, and my daughter was in Catholic school, all schools had to establish a gay-straight alliance. So her school did, and that's when the changes really started happening, fast-tracked with her. We saw so many changes. But our school still had a policy that parents were the primary teachers of their kids, and that there would be open communication between school and home. That was their stated policy. And to us, pride just meant that young people who identified as lesbian, gay, and bisexual wouldn't be bullied at school and would be accepted, and they would have friends. So we didn't see any danger in being involved in this. But we've learned now that by grade 11, she was going by non-binary at school and using different pronouns. The school kept this from us, and we were really involved with the school. We were at school all the time. They knew us, but yet chose to keep it from us. And it's hard because other people in the community knew, but we did not know. So we weren't able to even try to get in front of this or help our daughter understand what was going on. And then around that same time, Bill 16 got passed in Canada, and it took away a lot of our rights to be able to protest and help, because they amended our Human Rights Act, and in all but 3 provinces took out sex and replaced it with gender identity and expression. So that happened in June of 2017. Once that happened, the school changed its policies, and they also, this is a Catholic high school, they took sex out of their respect policy and changed it with gender identity and expression. Now, a lot of this, hindsight's 2020, they didn't tell the parents they were doing this. You had to really research and find out, like, what's going on? Why is the school being so secretive? So when our radar really went up, our daughter was getting an award for Pride. Then I was like, well, how are you involved in Pride? We found out the school had hooked up the school committee with the adult Pride committee in the city. And we didn't know about this. And we had learned that our daughter had even made a speech during school hours saying that she wasn't supported when she came out as being a lesbian. And she got a lot of attention for doing that. And she got awards for being involved in this community. She got scholarships. But we knew none of this. As far as we knew, we were still going on vacations, having family game nights. We thought everything was fine. But then when we went to the Pride event, we heard people from the speeches, including people that worked in the schools and doctors, that they were like bragging about helping kids change their identities at school and keeping it from parents, and a doctor talking about how happy she was about giving hormones to kids in the foster care system. So at that point, my husband and I were on high alert. We didn't come down on her too hard. We were trying to gather information and see what was going on, but we got complete pushback. Now, at this point, we think she's just a lesbian. We still don't know about the non-binary and the pronoun changes. I continue to work on our relationship with her. She got a lot of scholarships to university, mostly from LGBTQ organizations. And then in the fall of 2019, I took her to university. She was accepted into the education program. She seemed to be back on track. But within a couple months of being at the University of Alberta, she began calling herself queer, then non-binary, and then finally stopped talking to us in October of that year. We continued to provide financial support. We reconciled. It happened again the next fall, but then finally Christmas of 2022, reconciliation began. And then last year in May, we had a really hard conversation. We agreed to disagree on many things. We visited her all the time. And she began staying with us again. And then she got approached in early part of this year, right after Christmas, after we'd had a great Christmas, by people affiliated with our opposition party, and asked her to help do this protest where she got platformed on the news. So after finally reconciling, and she has a little brother who loves her and hadn't spoken to her in a long time, and everybody was so happy that our family was reconciled, she started getting attention again and being courted. I call it courted by these agencies and made to be a poster child again. So after our premier, and I'll talk about the changes because the changes are good news, but they upset our daughter. That's when she got approached and began working on this protest. And I guess to fast forward, we went from having a great Christmas together, exchanging Christmas presents. Her girlfriends spent the 4 days with us as Christmas as well. She was courted by these agencies and went from that to within maybe a month of being on the stage of this opposition government platformed or endorsed event, saying that her parents had disowned her. And we provide significant financial support for her tuition. So other than the emotional supports, it was entirely not true. And then I explained to Linda Blade our story, and we're scared to come out. I approached one media person to correct the story that we never disowned our child for being trans or for any reason, and never would. And the newspaper reporter I spoke to said they weren't going to change or add to the story. So Linda did a tweet. It got about 200,000 views. So some people, they don't know who we are specifically, but it did make me feel better. And I hoped my daughter would see it. We've tried to talk to her since. I think she's very embarrassed. We've only talked on tweets. And so our family's sort of scrambling at this point, trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together. But just, in the midst of this tragedy, it's not going to help us, but maybe future families. It's only legislation that our current premier is proposing, and it needs to support to get passed in the fall. But our current premier, Daniel Smith, is proposing that parents not be kept in the dark, that minors won't be able to get surgery under 17 or puberty blockers under 16 without or even under 18 without parents' permission, and that parents know about what's being taught in the school so they can opt in or out and know what's going on with these committees like the Gay Straight Alliance. So basically that parents are back to being partners in education and not just assumed to be a danger to their children. So that's good news for our province, but it's not passed yet. And Premier Smith does need all the support she can get. And I guess that's the end of my story.
We're going to now go to Lara Kendall, and she's a competitor in roller derby and now preparing a sex-based schools guidance handbook. Is going to tell us about Canadian schools guidance, and welcome, and is also from Alberta. So welcome, thank you so much, Lara, and over to you.
So I play roller derby, played for 9 years, and in the history of roller derby, apparently we've always been LGBT inclusive, but I didn't know that there was going to be transsexuals on the track until I played a tournament. So there was none on my original team. So roller derby was originally sex-based, hard sport, originally for women only. In my area, the women who started roller derby, mothers and lesbians, were supportive of LGBT individuals and also allowed men to coach and officiate the games. So then transsexuals came in very quickly, about 2014, and then they came in full force. With transsexuals and transvestites introducing themselves into roller derby, mothers and lesbians were forced to team up with them, no questions asked. Women became an umbrella term. In roller derby, there's certain kinds of groups, and there's democratic groups and not so democratic groups. And I do transactional analysis, psychotherapy, that's sort of a group psychotherapy. And a combat group is a specific group where leaders are not questioned, orders are followed, and those who do not comply are ostracized until they comply or leave. Gender involves magical thinking, and because there is a junior co-ed program, this ideology is psychologically damaging to children. In women's roller derby, young boys who should have been sorted out eventually away from competing with women and eventually out to the men's league were actually allowed to play with women, as decided by the mother and coach. There's a few mothers and coaches of these boys in my league who were actually allowed to play with women, as decided by these women, no questions asked. And as these women began getting, our women, as the players began getting more severely hurt more often, women were silenced. Instead of listening to women who were getting hurt and quitting, coaches ignored these women and bragged about the accomplishments of their sons. One transvestite boy who was about 12 on our team, his mother was extremely vicious with me and bullied me online, calling me a TERF. Men and boys are taking spots away from women. That's in all sports now. It used to just be roller derby. Now it's all across Canada. And the coaches syrup over conflict. All debate is blocked. And I was cast out of the group for asking questions. I wrote a grievance, and I did quit recently. In my grievance to the league, I stressed a long list of important facts. A few of our women have their own problems, growing suicide rate for women. They don't need to be taking care of men. I was silenced by an inclusion policy, vilified and othered. Isn't it ironic, called TERF by the mother of the boy who dressed her son up as a girl. And she had done that since he was about the age of 3. The sexual offense rate of trans-identified men show perpetrator behavior. Men who are not confident will use female sports to barrel women over. This is actually a quote from a male player bragging about having barreled women over. This is perpetrator behavior. The forced use of pronouns, that's another element that's in their code of conduct. And this goes against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 2, freedom of expression, written for individuals in the pursuit of truth and knowledge. These are important things. I chose to study transgender interventions and autism at the University of Calgary, While I officially studied group dynamics and child development, achieving a master's of educational research. My son is autistic, he's 14, and about a quarter of transgender labeled kids are autistic. This is very disconcerting to me. This is abuse, experimental abuse on special needs kids on the spectrum. My research looks at a case study of a Catholic girl, very similar to Jenny's story. I also looked at brain scan papers with Michelle Cretella, the CEO of the American College of Pediatricians, on the transgender brain. This is pseudoscience. We've looked at that. And she's going to be writing this guideline with me where we were going to debunk this kind of the suicide stats, the brain scans, the pseudoscience that it's very, very research biased. So I use my roller derby research as an investigation into authoritarian organizations. Roller derby is the microcosm, generally explaining the macrocosm of Canadian groupthink. This leads to the PowerPoint of the school guideline, ethically addressing gender confusion in schools. Okay, well, I started this school guideline with Michelle Cretella of the College of Pediatricians. She's always spoke out, and I met her in Hands Across the Aisle around 2016. And then I met Linda Blade a little later in the Alberta's Women's Declaration Division. And she really helped me with the sports element while I was in roller derby. I needed a lot of support. I also worked with Beth Stelzer and helped her with Save Women's Sports in the very early stages of that. I go into the psychological elements that are causing this groupthink. And from what I've boiled it down to is there's this codependence with teachers where they're really acting in unexplained phenomenological ways. They're telling kids that they can't be specious, they can't be homophobes. They're using a lot of shaming behavior on our children. And children are valuable, they're vulnerable, they're needy and dependent, they're immature, and they're imperfect. And teachers have this idea in their head that these children are their little friends and they don't understand boundaries. In transactional analysis, we use language that doesn't shame. We don't name call, we describe behavior. I read this book on codependence, I'm Dying to Take Care of You, written by nurses. And a lot of this behavior transfers to teachers, where teachers are hyperly taking care of everyone else, but not their own needs, their own self-care. I see a lot of heavy drinking in teachers right now. I have 3 school-age kids. I have a 14-year-old, I have a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. I see a lot of overeating in teachers. I don't see them looking after their own needs before they go and save the planet. And that is really an element of a psychological game. Children cannot discriminate between someone else's irresponsible behavior and their own behavior. So when a husband rages at his spouse, shame, anger, fear, and pain are induced in his listening children. When a baby is not held, shame and fear are induced. We're told, let the baby cry it out. That's not a good way to raise children. We need to hold our children close. Children cannot intellectually drop a boundary in place to protect themselves from the definitions of others. Part of the package that develops does not belong to them, but are projected on them by parental figures. This is where teachers come into play, and they're using words like homophobe, and children will not want to be straight in that atmosphere when they're shamed for just developing normally. Yes, we want to show that there are lesbian and gay parents, but the magical thinking that it takes to leap to someone is born in the wrong body, that is a double bind putting on children ideas that they can't step out of. And I'll get more into the double bind as we go along. An abused child learns to believe in nothing and hence goes to live out and experience the hopelessness of believing in nothing, a spiritual cynicism brought on by sarcasm, rage, shame, and fear-based parental figures. In my case study, the girl was very cynical. She was very cynical in a Catholic school about God. And I think that's not living congruently. But I think that the Catholic school has something to do with it being worse in the Catholic school because, as Jenny said, it's mandatory that there's a SOGI program. In other public schools, it's not mandatory. The children are expected to lead their own SOGI groups in Alberta, but in the Catholic system, it's just more intense. And then you also have the magical thinking. If you're religious and believe in God, that's fine, but the secular schools don't seem to be having as much a problem with the magical thinking. So this is where we get into the codependence, that the teachers are trying to take care of matters that they really don't have the skill or the understanding to do. And so I'm talking about the teachers being codependent. So let's say there's a teacher who saw that sort of no boundaries with, say, her mother. And instead of feeling valuable in that situation, she takes on her mother's feelings of not being valuable, and she'll have a lower self-esteem, but she might also oscillate to feelings of grandiosity. And that's where teachers will tell children that they can have a space with them. They might be the only safe space this child will ever see. That's a feeling of grandiose that we need to look and educate teachers on. That this is what they're doing. There was a question of safe space, and my friend asked a teacher, if there was a 9-year-old girl who wanted to get pregnant, would you give her a safe space to do that? And the teacher said yes. And I thought, that's crazy. That needs a parent-teacher intervention. But teachers think that they're going to save the world. And the source of this is codependence, which is a disease that can be cured. So I'm going to be using some of these exercises in my school guideline to get the teachers to go through and understand themselves a little bit better. There's a codependence checklist. And the deeper issue is sending children to double bind. Now, a double bind message is two sets of ideas that are contradictory, and the child cannot fulfill these things. And none of the options are in the best interest of the child. To say a man is a woman, that's a double bind. That's a box that the child cannot get out of. In codependence, these are the messages that are much deeper, that parents or teachers, any parental figure that a child looks to love for, may say these things. And the most important one I want to think about, and I want you to think about, is Jazz Jennings. Grow up, don't grow up, right? That's the most codependent family that we can really understand, because we're all watching that together. Okay, and then I'm going to go into some of the SOGI material. These things are not for kids. We have lesbians with lesbians that are transgender lesbians. You know, that's just perpetrator behavior. We have this female body with the breasts removed and a rainbow vagina. That is a mockery of the human body. That's not okay. This is abuse on our children. Moonbags from the University of Calgary. You can't even say the name. You can't say female. You can't say woman. It's just for people to support bleeding bodies. And then we have sexual orientations that go into BDSM, attraction to people that share a need for consent and negotiated power exchange. This is not appropriate. And this needs to be pointed out. We're not going to put up with this. Now, groupthink is what's happening with these teachers. And it's not because they're bad people. In codependence, we see that these people are trying to be perfect. They're trying to please others. They're trying to try hard. They're trying to be strong. They got to hurry up. It's all got to happen. Like tomorrow, we have to be completely inclusive and diverse and have equity today. And this is not realistic thinking. This is program thinking. So then I go into the case study. And again, the arrogance of the school, they're discounting the mother's intelligence. They changed the girl's name without telling the mother. The mother was dealing with the palliative care of her own mother, who was dying and going through a divorce. And they say trans-identified kids, so many of them have lost a parent or a significant person close to them. This is trauma. And mom needed help at the time. So then I have Michelle Crutella as part of the school guideline, and she's going to debunk those studies because she comes from a really great place of authority, and she's been in this fight since the beginning. And she has a good sense of John Money's family history has to also be outlined, that John Money believed that men should be gilded like horses. Like, he really had a hate for himself. And that was brought on by his father beating his mother. And again, we see this as a result of early childhood trauma. All of transgender behavior and experimentation really comes from a hard place. So then I go into and explain really to teachers and parents that there's different parenting styles. What Jazz's parents do is marshmallow parenting, and that's allowing the child to fail so that the parent can then take on a whole bunch of drama and a whole bunch of attention, because in childhood they learned that they needed this attention, that somehow they weren't getting it, and they would have to do these game playing, it's psychological games, bring people into their dramas. Drama triangle, we call it, where there's a persecutor, there's a victim, and there's a rescuer, a savior, and they play this constantly. Jazz's mom is constantly saving. She's constantly getting attention. She's the real star of the show. Now, what has to happen with teachers, they have to understand that they're not the friends of these kids, that there's ways to be negotiable. We don't want to be rigid, but we don't want to abandon children into magical thinking. So bullying is happening as a result of gender ideology, obviously. If pronouns are mandatory, we don't have freedom of speech. And I'm just putting in here as an exercise that I would get teachers to recognize how these messages are sent from a rigid viewpoint. Freedom of speech is degraded. I mean, that's rigid thinking. That's rigid parenting. That's not negotiating. That's not teaching a child democracy. And then we have double bind messages, right? Where teachers are gaslighting students. There's 69 genders. And a child yells, no, there's only 2, and he gets thrown out of class. And this has just happened in Alberta. My writing instructor told me this. Her kids were telling her this happened in her school, and she just can't believe how kids are being gaslighted and be expected to believe these things that can't possibly be true. A major thing that needs to be addressed in school guideline is online. Teachers are encouraging my kids to do online social media. And what happens in this online social media is bullying. There is no need for a teacher to be asking a child to get on their phone and do social media with the other kids. I don't know why it's happening, but it's happening. And I guess monkey see, monkey do. And this is, I think teachers have allowed boundaries to become so degraded that they just don't see the harm. They choose not to. Premeditated ignorance. But what's happening online is a lot of loneliness, a lot of public shaming, no adult safeguarding. Thoughtful youth are blocked and othered. We saw that it happens on Twitter. You'd think it's not going to happen to kids. Yes, it happens to kids. Loss of boundaries. Then we have the grooming, and children are being taught codependence by codependent parental figures. And this is, when we're leading to that, and boys are definitely outperforming girls at every age from what I've seen in roller derby every time. And it's not allowed to be questioned. And not only that, but boys will have romantic interests and men will have romantic interests and coaches have, and this has always been the bigger problem in sports, because what happens is women are being exploited. Men are there just to pick up the women. And when the relationship is over, the women leave, not the men. So again, women are pushed out of their own spaces. They're not allowed to feel safe. They can't be themselves, and they have to curtail to the men, because that's the groupthink. I mean, the men come first, no matter what. If a girl gets hurt on the track, a man comes barreling at her and he was unsafe, she gets the penalty. I've seen it. It's insane. So we see girls are going to get bullied, and it continues to happen. And when I talk to the team, I say, Daniel Smith is going to make it so girls can have their own space again. And they laugh at me and say, oh, that'll never happen. They're very, very sure of themselves that now that the gates have been opened, they can never go back. And I don't believe that. I believe that the boys can be separated from the girls again. Again, that discounting parents as uneducated and tyrannical, that's interesting. I believe that that's really projecting their own stuff on parents. So here's some resources I'll have for the guideline. People need to go to 12-step groups and look at themselves and look at their family of origin. And there's a lot of addiction going on, including online addiction, right? Sex addiction. Sex addiction is where parents are fighting teachers with no boundaries as far as sex and children go. We've always known that there's been that problem, that teachers will have sex with their students given the opportunity. I've seen it. We've all seen it. It's always happened. Now we are at the perfect storm, like Jenny said, and there is no way anyone is going to talk about it if it's happening. Even if it has nothing to do with gender ideology, everyone has been silenced. Not all teachers, okay. I'm talking about male teachers who have gotten into that position specifically to be predators. So then I use the ideas of child development under TA, and that's pretty involved, so I won't get too far into it, but it gets into some why unexplained behaviors happen. And that's basically TA. It's like the id, the ego, and the super ego, but it's in ways that we can understand and explain it to anyone, including children. And I'm just going to leave it there then.
So we're now going to hear from Eva. Eva Kurilova is a writer for Redux Online magazine, and the title of her talk is Sex-Based Rights in Canada Begin in Alberta. So over to you, Eva.
So I'm a writer. I write for Redux. I also have my own Substack, and I write for a Substack called The Distance. And at these two places, I've been tracking kind of the development of the pushback against gender ideology in Canada, which has been very slow, very small, but it is starting. It actually started in New Brunswick when the premier there changed the sort of rules around changing children's names and pronouns in schools. And the next province to follow that was Saskatchewan. And, I was sitting there thinking, okay, here in Alberta, like, when are we going to start? When are we going to start doing this? Our province should definitely do something. We have a conservative government. We have a conservative premier. And early November of 2023, the UCP, the United Conservative Party, had their annual general meeting. And finally, Danielle Smith, our premier, for the first time, started talking about parental rights. Namely about knowing, what schools are doing with your children. And at that same meeting, there was two proposals that the delegates passed. So one referenced schools and one referenced women's jails, which was really good to see, because obviously we have an issue here in Canada of men self-IDing into women's prisons. That's mostly a federal issue, but in provincial jails, that's a problem as well. And so that was fantastic. I thought, great, something's finally happening. And little did I know that a few days later, I would receive an invitation to consult with the premier in person. And so I was quite shocked because I didn't expect this at all. And so I had about a week to prepare. I had two other friends that were going to be there with me. All of us are gay. And so we actually weren't even really told what we would be speaking about. So the three of us had a lot of calls, and we decided, okay, we're really going to try and hammer home the child transition issue, because that's like really important. That's a winning issue, we think. So we knew we had just a half-hour meeting. So we kind of hashed out, okay, we're going to really tackle this. And November 15th, or 16th, I don't know, we finally met with her. And, up until the moment that we met with her, I thought this is some kind of trick. This is, we're going to get ambushed, like the TRAs are going to get us. But lo and behold, it was the premier. And also Rob Anderson, the executive director of the premier's office, was there. And we had a really good talk. She actually went over. We actually talked for 45 minutes. She had a meeting after us, but she was really interested in the issue. You could tell she really cared. She knew it was a problem. She wasn't completely like 100% up to speed on everything, but she was really trying to understand. She was taking a lot of notes. I had a chance to really tell her about the harms of like puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, to tell her about what's happening to kids in schools, to tell her about my concerns that young girls like me specifically were getting transitioned, young gender nonconforming girls who could get swept up in this. And she was really listening. Like, I really got the sense that she wants to move on this. We weren't the only people she consulted with. You'll hear from Linda Blade, of course, she consulted with her as well, and other people. And so we left the meeting feeling really hopeful. This was mid-November. This was before she went off on a trip after that. Then it was the holidays. So we didn't hear anything for a while. And then January 31st, 2024, as you've heard already, she released a video where she had a whole host of proposed policies. There was kind of tackling gender in 3 areas, in the education system, in the health system, and in sports, which is again thanks to Linda. And so that was just fantastic. Like, we felt so thrilled that this had gone through. And I actually got a phone call that day from one of the people who had set this up, and he said, because we weren't sure how much influence we had. There was other people she talked to, but he told me, after your meeting, it really seemed like you guys helped and had an influence and really instilled in her the need to do this and to go forward with this. So about a week after that, there was a roundtable held in Edmonton by Minister Tanya Furr. She's the Minister for the Status of Women, Arts, Culture, and Inclusion, which is their word for the alphabet community. They use this god-awful acronym here in Alberta, 2SLGBTQ. I don't even say it. But anyway, so the roundtable was for the members of the alphabet community. So myself and 3 other friends went up to Edmonton to support the policies. And there was about 7 other people there who were against them, trans activists. And that was interesting. I've described it as Twitter in real life, because there was a lot of yelling. There was a lot of tears from the other side, the people who oppose these policies. They were telling the minister that she's going to cause kids to kill themselves. They were saying the premier was going to cause that. They were being very, very histrionic, very emotionally manipulative. There was one particular man there, Christopher Wells. He's a professor at McEwan University. He co-opted, he would press to speak, and he would speak forever. Like, we only had 90 minutes, and he was really just accusing her of the most awful things. They were calling on her to resign. Kudos to the minister. She really kept her cool. She just kept a straight face. She listened. And right afterwards, the 7 of them that were there in opposition, they scurried away because media was waiting downstairs, because Christopher Wells had tipped them off, even though this meeting was supposed to be quite secret. And they went, and there was quite a lot of networks there. There was Global, City TV, CTV, Edmonton Herald, and the 7 of them kind of stood, huddled in front of the cameras, calling on the premier and the minister to resign, saying how awful this was, And we were waiting around because I wanted my chance to speak as well. But it really seemed like they were speaking to them for like 45 minutes. Eventually, I walked to one of the anchors and I was like, hey, look, we were there too, and we were there in support of the policies. Like, you might want to get our side as well. And actually, to my surprise, they did. They wrapped up with the other guys, and they were in a rush. They had to go see the minister, but they did allow me to speak. And they asked a lot of good questions. I was really happy. Lo and behold, when it came time for the news segments, they showed a little 5-second clip, but I was still really happy that every network that was there did actually include me, and they did give, they did show the reality that there was another side there. So that was pretty huge for Canada. And so as people have said already, you know, Danielle Smith could really use a lot of support because the entire media is against her. There's this consistent narrative that she's responsible for kids killing themselves. It's quite atrocious. You know, a few weeks ago, Justin Trudeau came to Alberta and he sat down and he met with a lot of the people that were at our round table, but of course, nobody from our side, only the people who were there against them, right? So it seems like an uphill battle, but I will say that the NDP, the opposition party, they're currently having a leadership race. And I don't, if you've noticed, the candidates for leadership, they haven't really been talking about this issue because I think they're starting to get scared that it's not a winner for them if they talk about child transition. They've been sort of quiet on it. There are some MLAs that are talking about it, but they're not running for leadership. So I think that despite what the media is saying, you know, most people in the polling and stuff, they do support these policies. I just think a lot of people are too scared to say it publicly. So I do have a lot of hope, and I think that this is a really fantastic start. It's a small start. We have a long way to go. You know, federally, Canada is still pretty screwed, but I'm really proud that in Alberta this is beginning.
Now on to Linda Blade. She's from Canada. She's a sports performance coach, co-founder of International Consortium on Female Sport. Her recent notable achievements are she collaborated with Canadian journalist Barbara Kay in 2021, writing the book Unsporting: How Trans Activism and Science Denial Are Destroying Sports. Established International Consortium on Female Sport, which is a very important advocacy group, and then also successfully convinced the Conservative Party of Canada to pass a policy resolution recognising sex-based rights for women in September 2023. So we could go on and say more, but thank you so much, Linda, and over to you.
It's been quite a ride since January 31st, just so amazing, because just the Premier speaking out and questioning the dogma and seeing that, you know, 78-80% of the public is in agreement with her, and every time the opposition is trying to vilify her, there's a flood of messages now saying no, the Premier is right to be questioning this. It's like the dam has broken. I had a chance to meet with the Premier, and thank goodness for Eva and her colleagues for breaking the ice and meeting with the Premier. I think that made a huge impact. And in fact, right after that meeting, I got an email from Rob Anderson saying, could you meet with the Premier after the COP, whatever that is, that meeting, the environment meeting in Saudi Arabia in early December. She was going to come home and they wanted a meeting before Christmas. So imagine December 22, 3 days before Christmas, the Premier could have come back from Saudi Arabia. She was probably still jet lagged. The importance of this issue for her obviously was very, very high on her list of priorities, because I mean, the entire government office when I drove down to Calgary, she said, well, you can do it by Zoom. I said, no, I want to be in the room with her. So I went down to Calgary. I had a nice little dinner with Ava. It was really nice, but it was like last minute. Got in there and the government office, the whole building was empty. It was the Premier and me pretty much, because everybody had gone home for Christmas. And she really listens. And, you know, she has been, like, she was a former radio talk show host. So her you know, you can tell she's listening. She's asking the right questions. She's got this little notebook. She's just writing notes. She asks questions. She writes. So she's really listening, and she really, really wants to do something right here. And so what I'm going to do, I know we are short on time, so I'm just going to read the section of her speech about women's sports, because that's, of course, what I met about sports issue with her. And so in her January 31st announcement or video, she said this: our government needs to deal with the emerging issue of unfair disadvantages that young women and girls are experiencing when competing with biologically stronger. Now, she uses this term, transgender female athletes. Well, I would say from now on, when I say that term, transgender female athletes, I'm just going to say TFA men, okay, in sporting competitions. I strongly believe that those who were born male, have transitioned or identify as female, are owed the opportunity to meaningfully participate in sports. However, there are obvious biological realities that give TFA men massive competitive advantage over women and girls. It is not beneficial for those women, including those who are transgender, for this divisive and sometimes dangerous situation to occur. That is why the government of Alberta will work with sporting organizations active in our province to ensure that women and girls have the choice to compete in a women's only division in athletic competitions and are not forced to compete against biologically stronger TFA men. We will also work with those same sporting organizations to ensure transgender athletes are able to meaningfully participate in the sport of their choice through the expansion of co-ed or other gender neutral divisions for athletic competitions. That's like the gist of it. It was fantastic, although of course, as I pointed out, the terminology was a little bit odd. The one thing I want to draw your attention to, there's this, I'm going to repeat the sentence. It is not beneficial for those women, she's talking about females, including those who are transgender, for this divisive and sometimes dangerous situation to occur. This was one of the points I made in our meeting. I'm saying that there are female athletes, a lot of them now, who are younger and they're non-binary or trans. They identify, but they stay in women's sports, and we don't have any problem with that. We do accept trans in sport as long as they're born female and they're not cheating by taking testosterone, right? So when she said that sentence, I think a lot of people miss the implication that what she's saying is, if you're born female and you identify as trans, having males come into that is also discriminatory against trans who are born female. So that's a really important point, and she hadn't thought of that before our meeting, and that's, you know, obviously. So I'm just going to say very quickly in summary, what's going to happen next, and this might be an answer to the question about there was a question to Lara about how you're going to implement in the schools. In this province of Alberta, I had this experience where back in 2003, I had to write a physical education manual for track and field athletics, like at the elementary school level. And they have these, what they call these third-party educational modules. And if the current Ministry of Education accepts it and thinks that your module for teacher learning is good or acceptable or somehow advantageous, they let you have that. They take it on themselves to incorporate it into the curriculum, which is what has been happening on the other side of this with the LGBTQ, like the trans activists, the trans ideology, gender ideology. Those modules have been incorporated into schools. So what Lara is trying to do is exactly that thing, where consult with the ministry. All of Lara's, whatever's in the school's guidance proposed document, obviously might not end up being verbatim in the school curriculum, but through consultation with the Alberta government, it is possible to push back and have this other learning module, you know, for the teachers. But, you know, obviously that will be vetted carefully. And that's the other thing that the Premier had said in her announcement, was that the government of Alberta has the right to vet third-party materials. And that drives the LGBTQ, the gender activists crazy, because they don't want the government to have the right to vet their modules in the schools. Anyway, that's a kind of an answer there. But anyway, so there's one other thing I need to clarify. In Canada, we have the 10 provinces and territories. The question of jurisdiction comes up, and Trudeau has stomped all over jurisdiction. But typically in Canada, education, health, and even sports to some degree are the jurisdictions at the provincial level. The power to do anything in those sort of on the ground activities is provincial. And Danielle Smith, what she's done, because Justin Trudeau is so crazy and so dictatorial, she has basically declared sovereignty within Alberta, within Canada. So basically reclaiming the kind of jurisdictions that normally were at the level of the province. And this is important to me in sports, because the national sports governing bodies are trying to push this ideology on the provinces. Like when I was president, I was previously president of Athletics Alberta. And when I would go to national meetings, they were saying, we must have full self-ID in sport. I'm saying, no, that's not going to happen in the province of Alberta. And they tell me, oh, well, you're breaking the law. I'm saying, no, in my province, I can do what we feel is right for the sport in our province. And especially now that CEDAW and World Athletics have established, the preeminence of biological sex. Now the national governing body is sort of trapped between an international policy that doesn't agree with them, and now, so the province of Alberta, we can assert our own sovereignty. So it's this jurisdictional fight, which is really important. And I've come to realize in my advocacy that the real power in this is either completely at ground level or at the level of WDI International or UN. I think that we have to be working at both the international level and at the ground level to combat. And this is what Martine Rothblatt or all of these original gender ideology zealots were doing. They were inserting themselves at Yogyakarta, and then they did it with the education system at ground level. And so these two levels working in tandem and then squished everybody in between. If we're going to combat this, it has to happen that way again on our side. And I'm grateful for Daniel Smith and the province of Alberta, where I live, to start this process in all seriousness. Now, what's happening though, is that we have now that this is my wrap up. Now that we have had Daniel Smith and the province of Alberta, the government of Alberta indicating they want to move on this issue, it's a race. It's a race in a couple of ways. We need the sport bill to come in as soon as possible, because there are now competitions where males are self-identifying purposely to hurry up and be in women's sports before they are not allowed to anymore. So that's one race going on. So, for example, Anne Andres, the powerlifter that has been, bringing turmoil to April Hutchinson and that group, he signed up for a competition. Alberta Powerlifting is going to let him compete as a woman again, June 6th to 9th, I believe, at the Alberta Championships. There's going to be a protest. But anyway, it's going to be a mess if he's allowed to, because, our group's going to be there and the other groups are going to be it's going to be crazy. And so there's that race to try to correct the record before these things happen. And then there's another race. The latest race is Trudeau's trying to bring in the hate speech, the hate crimes bill, or like the online hate bill, BLC C63, I believe it's called. And what their liberals are really out of their minds. They must be so desperate to impose their will on this, because now they're saying that you could be any Canadian caught espousing hate online could be jailed for life in prison. It's unbelievable. And yet, so the question is, maybe, we need to hurry up and get the province to protect Albertans before the national. I don't know how that's all going to work out. So there's this race between what, the government of Canada is getting more and more extreme. And now Alberta has got to push back quickly to protect its own citizens. So this is where we sit. This is where we sit right now. It's an important time. It's just very interesting. Every day something comes up, and we need to really, really be strong and give Premier Daniel Smith our full support. I don't care if you're left, right, center politically, but when a leader does the right thing on sex-based rights, that is something we need to support. So that's that's the wrap up. Thank you.
So Denise Garcia is from Brazil. She's 43 years old, mother of two, graduated in law. She's a Brazilian woman. She's one of Matria's directors, and along with colleagues and associates, they've been promoting positive actions in a scenario that's not very favourable for women and children in Brazil. She's also a cook and a voice artist. And the title of Denise's talk is The Panorama of the Erasure of Women in Brazil and the Creation of Matria, Perspectives for Confrontation. So thank you so much for coming to speak, and over to you, Denise.
My name is Denise, and I am a member of Matria, Associated Women, Mothers and Workers of Brazil. Brazil is, as you know, an immense and multicultural country in which women from all regions come together, aligned by the feeling of collective struggle and self-preservation, due to a scenario of a rapid advance of the queer agenda, following what has already taken place in countries of the Northern Hemisphere, as you already pointed here. Matria was established in July 2023 out of a need to instrumentalize the actions we are spearheading institutionally and to occupy decision-making spaces in legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We have taken our voices to representatives, senators, and even one of the Supreme Court ministers. And today she is the only woman to sit in the highest court in Brazil. Matria is not engaged or supported by political parties, nor is aligned as a left or right wing. Because being independent and super party is something crucial in order to develop our activities. It's also a non-profit organization with administrative and financial autonomy, focused entirely on women and children's rights. In just 8 months of existence, we have taken on daring struggles and succeeded in several of them. We proposed a legislative bill to protect sex-segregated bathrooms and intimate spaces for the safety of women and children, in order to prevent self-identification as an access criterion to those spaces. And we got over 20,000 people to support it on official pool in the Congress website. This bill is now on its way to becoming a law, although that may take some years to end. Beyond that advocacy work, Matria hired a lawyer to represent women's voices in lawsuits that are under judgment in the Supreme Court, in which women and children's rights are at stake. Today, we delve into a profound discussion on a matter that goes to the heart of preserving the safety and well-being of women and children in Brazil, the imperative of maintaining separated spaces by sex. In our journey towards a more just and equal society, it is crucial that we approach this conversation with a profound understanding of the unique challenges faced by women and the importance of upholding secure environments that respect their rights. Over the course of history, women have fought valiantly for their rights, including the establishment of spaces exclusively designed for their use. These spaces, whether in workplaces, restrooms, or other facilities, are not merely physical. They are the result of decades of struggles for dignity, security, and autonomy. It is paramount that we recognize and protect these spaces to ensure their continued progress in securing women's rights. Today, our focus lies on the preservation of separated spaces by sex, a concept that plays a pivotal role in guaranteeing the safety of women and children. The inviolability of these spaces is not an arbitrary segregation, but a fundamental acknowledgement of the unique vulnerabilities faced by women and the need for environments where they can feel safe and welcome. In navigating these discussions, we must tread with sensitivity to the concerns of women and mothers. This isn't about exclusion. It's about maintaining spaces where women and children can thrive without fear. As we champion inclusivity, we must also champion the preservation of those spaces, recognizing that the two ideals can coexist harmoniously. Preserving separated spaces by sex is a commitment to uphold the strides made in safeguarding women's dignity. In our dialogue today, let us emphasize the importance of finding nuanced solutions that balance inclusivity with the preservation of these spaces. As we reflect on the importance of secure spaces, let us not forget the countless stories of women who have fought for their rights, often against formidable odds. It is our collective responsibility to carry forward the legacy of those trailblazers and ensure that progress made is not eroded. Moreover, we can't ignore the growing concerns surrounding the inclusion of men, biological male, who self-identify as women in women's sports. As Linda just pointed, this complex issues has ignited debates over fairness, competition integrity, and the safeguarding of opportunities for women athletes. The intrusion of biological men individuals into women's sports raises legitimate questions about maintaining a level playing field, where physical advantages and differences between male and female athletes affect the integrity of competitions. Matria acknowledges the rights and struggles of transgender individuals, but we strongly oppose this intrusion on women's sports. Another subject in which Matria has acted against is the use of false data to impose public policy changes that benefit the trans population. There's a certain famous trans activist association with strong ties in the government, especially within the Ministry of Women, that propagates false information and intentionally wrong data regarding violence against LGBTQ+ individuals to impose their agenda. While acknowledging the importance of recognizing and addressing violence against LGBTQ+ individuals, it is vital to ensure that the data presented is accurate and reliable. Misinformation and exaggerated statistics not only undermine the credibility of genuine efforts to combat violence, but also risk inflaming tensions and misleading political decisions. We must be vigilant in scrutinizing the sources of information and advocating for evidence-based approaches that prioritize the safety, the well-being of all individuals without unjustified and disproportionate inclusion policies that may result from manipulated data. Our commitment to justice and equality requires us to uphold the integrity of information and resist attempts to exploit tragedies for political or ideological purposes. Lastly, I could not end this speech without bringing to your attention the fact that the Brazilian government, especially the ministries, are convening a strong campaign to avoid using the words women and mother and related terms. We are now people who breastfeed, people who give birth, people who menstruate. Those dehumanizing terms were used on official communication channels of Brazilian government, including the Ministry of Women. Important public policies such as post-birth care, free distribution of menstrual pads, and breast cancer prevention campaigns are being affected by the avoidance of words referring to women. This is an executive decision that is completely detached from the public opinion, from Brazilian culture, and from the most immediate concerns of the population. It also hinders the reach of those public policies that are aimed at women, but miscommunicates with the actual recipients, especially low-income and vulnerable women from favelas, small towns, and isolated communities. In conclusion, I urge each one of you to engage thoughtfully in conversations that honor the commitment to ensure secure spaces for women and children in Brazil and the world. Let us work together towards a society that not only respects the rights and safety of all its members, but also stands as a beacon of progress, understanding, and inclusivity. Thank you for your attention. Let the dialogue continue.